Alright, so I'm starting a new stone, and it's going to be a large Cleo's Eye Moissanite, and this is what my preforms look like. So you can see that's the girdle there. Obviously that's not how the design works. Decent job getting a culet in there, but you can tell it's obviously not very good. So if you were to order it from overseas, this is essentially what it looks like. But I ordered preforms, especially this design, so it reduces the amount of time to cut. Plus, getting a color like this, you can't really get rough. You have to either get a big block and cut it all the way down to this, which takes forever. You maybe not get the color you need, might have inclusions, so I like to order. It's more expensive for sure, but I order these preforms. This is what I get, and this is what I start with. Step one with any recut is to rough it up a little bit. I'm not even going to use water in this because I'm only doing a little bit. But I just want to definitely scratch up the table. And I'm going to do a little bit around it just because this is a larger stone. Doesn't have to be perfect or anything at all like that, but that's what it looks like after just kind of roughing it up a little bit. There it is. That's all the preforming for this one, since I ordered the big preforms. So that's it. I'm going to dop it up and get started. I'm going to start with this big Moissanite Cleo's Eye, and like most stones, the first step is to line everything up. This will be a little tough with the camera, but let's see how we can do here. So kind of line it up by eye, gotta hang on to it so it doesn't spin. Tighten that down. First thing I'm going to do is make sure I have it centered. I'm sorry, not centered, but have the stone positioned where I need it to, perfectly horizontal. I want these points to, be at my 72 and 24 index. So that puts a facet edge right on the lap, and I just give it a little scratch and it will make a triangle. And what I want is the triangle to be on the left and right side evenly. These preforms are not perfect, so can't really base the whole thing on that, but it's the best I can do. That actually looks really good. And as long as it's even, or potentially, you can see they're both off to the same direction, then we can adjust it. But this one is absolutely dead on, so that never happens. I work on centering it, which of course is going to change how centered I have it if I have to move it, which looks like I do. I start with 10, and again, these are angle readings, so it does not translate directly to measurements, but I use it as a measurement. Whatever it actually ends up being in millimeters, who knows. So I like to put 10 on there as a nice round number. Flip it over, and we're at 30, so I'm 0.2 of a degree off, which means I'm 1/10 off of center. Debating if that's even worth messing around with. We'll see if it's off on end to end here. I'm going to do 20 on this one just because it's a much bigger distance on tips like this. And it's exactly 20. So This is dead center between the two sides, and it's 1/10 of a degree off this direction. That is extremely good. So I'm not going to mess with the side because getting these lined up is a lot harder than getting these lined up. These you can cut a flat and use that flat to kind of keep the stone steady. Tips, you can't do that. You can't cut a flat on your tip because 1 millimeter off on a tip could be 3 millimeters off all the way around. So the fact that these two sides are exactly centered, I'm going to take that over having to readjust the whole thing again. That could take a very long time. And this one is being cut to be a range of size, so that little bit on the sides here does not translate to a lot of lost size overall. So we're gonna leave that exactly as it is, which I can honestly say I've never done before. So this one's off to a great start. I actually have my preforms done to where the pavilion is exactly the angle I need. It never comes exactly the angle I need, but it is exactly what I need. And then I have all the extra size and space put up into the crown, so I don't have to worry about going too deep or missing something on the pavilion. So let's start with the first side here. Set the angle. Raise it up, make sure it's not touching, or adjust it so it's cutting fairly far in. Make sure the angle's still good. Everything's locked down. Double check my numbers. So the first step is going to be to bring it in slowly and then cut the two on this side and the two on this side to make sure that we're centered. I'll cut the two on this side, two on this side to make sure that we're all the way down to the girdle, and I know that I'm deep enough. And once I'm deep enough, then we'll go around and we'll do all the rest of them, and we'll check it, but we're not going to worry too much about a perfect meet at the initial cutting. We'll check that after and fine-tune things. So get the water drip going. I'm not going to go too fast because this one pretty long step, so if I go too fast, and they're very small facets or very pointy facets, narrow facets, so they can be overcut easily by a little bit of hand pressure. So I don't run it too fast just to avoid blasting through one and then having to redo all of them to catch up. So maybe see that facet went from the tip all the way to the edge immediately, because we're on exactly the same angle, which means that this was lined up super well in the doffing process. That is super hard to do. So a little bit of luck was involved with this one for sure. So I was pushing a little too hard on that first one, thinking I had a long way to go, so I overcut that first one significantly. So I'm gonna actually lower it down, do a new one, go back, make sure I'm much more gentle this time. Flatten that out too bad. I'm gonna flip it over to the other side. I gotta keep double checking these numbers because there's so many of them. And this one's basically the same as the other one, how centered it was left to right. So the big difference will be on the side ones. One side is much closer. So right now I'm just kind of going by feel, sound, watching the angle. You can imagine if this were a square block, Even if you were to preform it on a 100 grit, it would destroy your 100 grit, make it useless after one stone just about. And that's perfect. That is all the way down on both sides there. So I'm going to do the sides. This one will definitely reach. This is probably the closer side. But I don't think that's going to be deep enough. Yeah, so that's why centering it is so important. Because these made it, and then that one side we did not center doesn't make it. Alright. We've gone all the way around. I'm gonna do a few more here because there's one little spot that's being missed. It's pretty small, that'll definitely come out. What did I do? Oh, that's why I missed that one. There we go. So I missed one. Skipped a number. There we go. So this is the culet after just letting the machine handle the meats. Just hand pressure and listening. Not acceptable for a finished piece, but you can see right there is a one that fell way short. But definitely enough to work with to begin with. We got kind of the rough culet in, and I kind of look around to see if there's one that's obviously deeper than all the rest. And this one actually came out pretty good. So when that's the case, I'll start with the ends again. And I try to establish a very accurate center. And when you have this many facets, the only way you can really do that is to start with fewer facets. So you can actually see where your center is instead of kind of just a big mess of points and stuff. So since they're so small and so easy to overcut, I hand rub all the facets in to the perfect point. So I'm going to start with these two end ones and just kind of looking at them, and they're really close. This one on the right side, which is actually on this side of the halfway mark, is a little deeper than the other one, so I'm going to set that down. You can probably hear it's not even hitting the lap. So I'm going to drop this down just until it just flutters on 1/100th of a degree. And minimal hand pressure. I'm just going to run this back and forth. I am going to move the point. But my goal is to make sure that I can see that the facet is being touched from culet to girdle. And it's missing the bottom right corner. So I'm going to keep going until the scratches are going to go from kind of going this way from girdle to culet, maybe on a slight angle, but they're going to turn into going sideways. And that's how you kind of keep track of which facet you're on, how far you're moving it. And on this particular design, it is very important that the lap is touching top to bottom. So that bottom right corner I must have hit something either here or here that made it cut a little deeper because it's not getting touched still. So if I don't fix that, what happens in this design is the next tier lines up with that one, and it's going to be off based on all the other ones because I went to a deeper corner than the rest of it. and that one's going to be off, and then the next one will be off, and the next one will be off, and on this many facets, that'll translate from this tier to this tier, and then there's 3 tiers on top. And by the time you take that little bit of error and you move it 4 or 5 times with the girdle, you end up with a super crooked stone. And this design's very important to have a as perfect as possible culet. Yeah, that corner's way off. And even if it's off compared to the rest of them, as you go around, if you hand rub it in the same spot, you know that you're consistent. So eventually you'll get all the way around and you'll have a perfect culet. And that's why this cut takes so long and costs as much as it does. So now that has actually moved the culet quite a bit. So now that's the deepest facet by far. And by far is still fractions of a millimeter, but that's how gem cutting works. And if you're hand rubbing and you need to take a break and you need to stop because you just get bored of doing this, it's important to make sure this lap stays exactly where it is. I leave my sponge in to keep it from moving too much, but you want to use the same spot on the lap. If you move it and you hit a high spot, you're already done. I've done these 2 and these 2. Now I'm going to do 2 here and 2 here, and that should give me a nice crosshair. So what that helps you do is if we do just these 2 and I start going this way, by the time I get through all these facets, I might have fallen a little short, and the next one's going to fall short and fall short and fall short. And by the time I get over here, it's not going to be anywhere near the culet. What will happen is this one will come up to meet these 2. I'll have to go back and redo all the ones in the middle. So if I do 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, then we just have this little corner basically. So a handful. If I get over here and realize I'm a little short, I can just go back and just touch those up. Same thing over here, just basically quarters at that point. And that'll save a lot of headache, having to go back and redo half the stone instead of just having to do a few here and there. So again, light scratches, get my scratches horizontal, see if we're hitting top to bottom. This one is missing the right corner, that bottom right corner. Might be time for me to flatten this. It's a long, tedious process. I don't do it very often, but I cut a lot of moissanite, so I end up with a sort of a dip in the middle. This would, provided I don't overcut it, this will shape this one into a perfect point, and you can see if you go too far by lining it up with that point between the 2. So it'll also help you, you can kind of determine if you need to go deeper this way, further this way. You can kind of move that culet around. They're barely touching. Hopefully they're flat because there's not much room to move those 2. This one has a little further to go. I can feel it. I can feel it hitting. You might be able to hear it. So our initial point between the 8 facets was pretty darn good because these all lined up exactly on the last one. I haven't really had to go back and correct anything. There's not much to fine tune. Just give it a little bit here and there. Another tough thing about this design is you have to have a perfect culet in every phase. So we have to, 600 has to be perfect so that our girdle ends up perfect, because that will translate to the crown. So if we get close and then the rest get close and then we pre-polish, you can't really make it perfect at pre-polish. So the idea is to get the girdle perfect so that the crown can be perfect, and then pre-polish and polish moves the culet at all, even if it's a little bit it won't mess up the crown. So 600 is probably the most important step to get the girdle right, and then pre-polish. We'll try and keep a tight culet and then polish just in case there's one that's got a scratch or a divot that we have to polish a little deeper. It doesn't mess up the whole design. So it's important to be as perfect as you can through all the steps. But the girdle is for sure the most important. This is a tricky step on this one because there's no reference point to make sure that everything is lined up. So when I do these, and if someone wants an exact size, I charge more, because if you were to say I need this to be exactly 12 millimeters, you can do the ends and you can make it 12 millimeters, but you can't determine if each side is the same depth. So you could be a little deeper on this side, and by the time you figure out that this side's too deep compared to this side, you have to cut every single facet in between, and you find out in the middle. And then you have to go back and recut it. And if they say I want 12 millimeters exactly, and one side's, you do it 12 millimeters, one side's deeper, you're going to go back and you're going to end up with 11.5. So you can't cut to the size you need. You have to cut to, if I need 12, I have to cut to, say, 12.5, and then find out, okay, this side's a little deeper, make it perfect, and when it's perfect, it's 12.3. So then we got to go back and we have to recut the whole thing again. It just takes hours and hours, and I'm done before the stone's finished. So the range of size is nice because I can, I'll cut it to as big as possible. In this case, he wants it as big as possible. So I'll start with the ends, get to the middle, see how accurate it is. If one side's deeper than the other, I'll just correct from that side this way. And when I'm done, it is what it is. If it's 12.6, 12.8, 13, it doesn't matter. So that is definitely the best way to go for these, and I give a pretty sizable discount to do that. So I'll get going here. It's also a girdle facet, so we have to run the lap slower, which means it takes a little longer to cut in the first place. So also when they do my preforms, they don't know how to do the design properly. So this particular facet here actually takes a while because I have to remove more material, cut it to the wrong shape. So we want to make sure that we're cutting past the center line here between the two end ones. So in this case, I'm on the side that's a little further this way, so by the time I get to the end there, I'm well past the center. So there's a couple of tricks with this design that are a little hard. Definitely not a beginner design. Some of the concepts of meat point don't really apply in some parts of it. I'm almost there. Start checking that meat there. Really at this point we're just lining up the seam between these two facets, two girdles, and that center line. It's nice, hopefully. Now this was pretty well centered between the points, so we shouldn't have one fall short. I do cut it fairly close just to maximize the rough. Probably hear it starting to squeak. It's the lap is getting a little worn down. It happens as fast as that. Here's the part where you don't know exactly if you're at the right depth, same as the other side. Ooh, that one was much closer. But it did make it. This other side should, yeah, this other side's going to make it, but not by much. So this is probably going to be a pretty big stone. These dark colors are a little hard to see. These shallow angles or shallow changes. This is only one index over. So I have an aluminum pencil. It's just a stick of aluminum, softer than most stones you'll work on. And you can just use the edge of it and just drag it across the facet edges. Doesn't chip anything, doesn't scratch anything, and it'll highlight the edges. When you're looking at it, you see silver lines. It does not make for very sharp lines, but it helps you at least determine where your facets are. So once you determine that this side was the deeper side and you've cut this one to line up, now you can do that one to line up, and that'll tell you how far off the next one is and so on, and you'll line them up that way. So you can imagine if this were an exact size, you'd have to do this, go all the way to the end after correcting it, measure it, only to find out we're off by 1/2 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter, sometimes more, and then you have to go back and do it all over again. With this particular design, every following tier depends entirely on the previous one. So, and again, it's multiple rows. So this is the girdle we're doing. Then we're going to do the baryons. And I would say this girdle is the most important. So if everything is correct here, now I'll be overcut on the tip a little bit, but that should be, once we roll it around here, this should be the side that was a little deeper. Because we are moving this, we're not moving it much at all. I don't even know exactly what measurement you put on this. 1/10 of a millimeter, less possibly. But if we have 4 or 5 tiers, and we're off by 1/2 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter, times 4 or 5, then you're off by 1 millimeter. These last two here are very shallow. They're only 1 index apart, which is, again, just a fraction of a millimeter. The tip was off. I like coming in from the side now. There we go. Whew. All right. Now the girdle's in, so I'm gonna close this up, maybe clean the lap off, get a little extra water drip. You can probably see now the stripe here. That's where the stone was hitting. It's kind of gray, worn out. I can feel it smooth, and then here where it's a little bit brighter copper, that's where it's clean from where we sharpened it. So you can see that line, and I can actually feel it grabbing compared to this is smooth. This, I can feel gravity, even feel like it's sanding my finger a little bit. So got it clean. We're going to spin it dry and take a close-up for you. So we have the girdle all done and the culet done, and now we're moving into the baryon facets. These are a little tricky as well because they're actually super steep, so they're almost like a girdle, but not quite. But the shallowest one is 71 degrees, which is very, very shallow. And that can cause problems with kind of sliding. So if we're cutting this way, the lap's hitting on the side first, and then it'll kind of go like this, and it'll take off more in the front and less on the end as it goes up and over, and it causes curves and can kind of throw things off. So you have to cut these slow, almost like a step cut, where you want the lap to be spinning from the girdle towards the culet. However, you can't get that angle on it. You do have to watch out for the quill hitting on too steep. You have to watch out for the index hitting this. Watch out for the angle adjustment catching on that and then pulling it out of your hand and breaking your stone off. So there's a lot of little things you got to kind of watch out for. So you just want to light hand pressure, go slow, try and keep in the same general area of the lap, like a step cut, and then just keep a solid grip and up and down slowly. Check it. It's kind of like a girdle facet where it's down low, so you want to, move your light if you need to, and get in there real close with the loop and everything. So we're going to get started on that. Index. This first one's tricky because you're trying to meet the point where the facet meets the girdle, but it's going to look like you can overcut that very, very fast. Because it'll look like you're at the point or you're getting close to it, and it'll still look like a sharp point because you overcut it, but then you're actually moving the girdle. So you gotta really watch it, even if it's hard to see from the side. So from my angle, I'd have to spin it like this and look at it straight on. Make sure to go back to the same index. So that is what I'll do once it gets closer. So again, this one cuts pretty fast because it's almost the exact same, only one index gear off. And at this point, I aim to line up the girdle with the facets, because I know that the culet facets were really, really close. But I want to do the girdle as my reference point, just in case the facet is crooked or cuts a little different. And that way I know that when I pre-polish, if something's a little further or deeper, I know that the girdle is still going to be flat. Or I can make the girdle flat, use that as a constant reference, and then everything will line up with the crown. And in this particular design, that means the eye effect will be super accurate. The facets will meet in the center, and you can verify how you're doing if everything lines up. So right now this side is straight line from culet facets all the way through the girdle. So we're doing really good on this side. Okay, we'll check this side. So as I touch here, it's moving in the center but not on the right. So it probably swiped a little too much and I hit it on a little angle. And now it's perfect. So to keep an eye on. This next one's going to go quite a bit deeper. is perfect. Oh, that's a sigh of relief. That's what that is. If you end up being way off on the last of the girdle, there's just so many things that could have been wrong. Facet could cut crooked, you could have missed a meet point. But if you do all your checks along the way, you can narrow it down. Alright, holy smokes. Lined up great. So our girdle is probably as perfect as it's going to get, so that means our crown, this one should come out really nice. Nothing to alter or take care of, so we'll worry more about our polish being really, really good and a sharp culet than the variants lining up perfectly. Those are perfect right now, so get this cleaned up and the pre-polish going. And with Moissanite, we're going to have to watch the heat, so I'll be checking that every so often. The blue pre-polishes pretty well, unlike the green. That's the other darker color. So we'll want these to be pretty much scratch-free. No frosting or anything like that. So, like usual, the bottom is pre-polishing a little more. It's working its way up to the tip. I'll leave it like that though. It's a lot easier to redo the bottom and get that culet to come back together. So this way we'll keep a nice sharp culet. The best part about this design is after you get through all the cutting and the meats, all the pre-polishing, you get to do it a third time. Oh shit. Throw a little bit of 3000 grit. That's it though. Too much 3000 grit and it gets very frosty, like orange peely. It can move facets super fast, so you gotta be careful with it. I just want a little extra bite here because we got a lot of facets to get through. So I can see the frosting already. It's not too bad though. It's just not getting to the culet. There we go. Alright. The meats are looking good. Actually, it's looking a lot more consistent than the 8K was, so definitely warmer though. Still removes the 600 scratches. See, it's doing alright. It's definitely warming up faster, but it is moving way faster, so I'm going to focus more on the culet being pointy. Not going to worry about any frosting. As long as the culet is sharp. Once I get to the polish part, it'll stay sharp. These end ones take the longest. They're the biggest, fastest, and they're obviously the longest top to bottom, or culet to girdle, I should say. Another reason why hand rubbing the culet in is nice is all the scratches from 600 are going this way, and with all the pre-polishing going this way, I think it takes them out a little smoother, and then you can tell if you're missing a scratch, it's obviously going the other direction from the polishing. So I'm going to charge this one again a little bit, I think. Let's see how it does if I just clean it up a bit. Sometimes you can have too much diamond. Well, that's pretty good. It is frosting, so I'm going to leave it a little bit short so I can polish it a little deeper and not worry about moving my culet. Yep, bad thing to do on polish, because every other facet would take 3 lifetimes to move. Yeah, this side's frosting pretty bad. Let's try recharge here. See if that makes a difference. Not going to use the 3K this time because of the side of the stone there. That's a little weird. I'm going to start in the center here. See if that makes a difference. Yep, and that pre-polished perfectly. So. Well, these can be super tough to get to continue to line up, so we're gonna have to probably use the cheater a little bit, but we're not overly concerned with meats at this point. These have no bearing at all. Let's see how close that is. We're gonna move that back a little. These have no bearing on performance or anything lining up. So we want them to be shiny so they don't reflect any scratches or anything. But I'd be much more concerned about getting these to be shiny opposed to the meats being perfect. It's of course nice if they line up, but we know our girdle is perfect from our original culet cutting. And we know the culet is perfect, so keep an eye on the temperature because these are a little bit larger facets. Perfect. Just have the 2 frosty ones. I think they're going to be a problem, but I did leave extra space. Sometimes, who knows what the magic is. Check temperature quick. The angle is still reading exactly the same on all of them, so not cooperating. Just doesn't seem to be polishing the whole facet. It's like we're having to kind of recut or reflatten. It's not hitting the tip. Right now I'm 3 below the original angle, 300. Should be plenty. Holy smokes. I'm not sure if Moissanite has directional hardness. Definitely notice the frosting occasionally on some facets, and not necessarily all or that many, but sometimes just doesn't cooperate. Holy smokes, alright. That is polished. That one made us work for it. Alright, we have the stone transferred in the quill. Step one, as always, is to line up the crown now with the pavilion facets. So in this case, it's got a lot of small facets. So what I do is I will actually line it up using one of the larger end facets. So just set it to that exact index, drop this down, and then just lower it until it touches. Now kind of start at the tip and let the stone roll into place till it clicks, more or less. Pick it up on the tip and then let it drop. That way I know it's on the end. Give it a little pressure. Tighten the dot. Drop the angle a little bit so we're only scratching the top edge. And I am going to use a marker on this one. And actually I'm going to do a couple on the side here. And we'll double check using some of the smaller facets. So I'll drop it down till it just touches. Give it some scratches. And see how we're hitting. And we are hitting terrible. Not even close. So it's actually so bad I'm not going to adjust that one. We're going to redo that. I must have missed the... Try that again. With those two facets so close to each other, it is kind of hard to feel where you're at. So that's a lot better. So because of that, we're going to move over just to another random one. Make sure we just drop it till it just touches. So that looks pretty good. I'm just kind of bouncing between facets here, just checking all of them. I'll check the sets, both sides. And that's starting to look pretty good. Just want to make sure it didn't shift while it was being transferred. Make sure it's hitting evenly across all of them. Some might hit a little different. Well, that actually looks good. So now we got it. That's lined up. Well, this is kind of like the pavilion where we're starting on the ends, so we don't really know if we're lined up until we cut them all. So we'll do the same technique. We'll start on the ends. We'll try and get them close. Work our way towards the center. And then we'll figure out which corner needs any movement, and then we'll adjust those. There's really nothing to eyeball yet since this is our first one. You can eyeball the thickness of the girdle, but it is not a great indicator of how even you are. Just trust the machine on this one and use a light touch. This side's a little easier to see when the light hits it. Oh boy, that one blasted right through too. So, kind of like I thought, that right side is going to be... This side's not going to be deep enough, the one's be overcut. So that's good, that means those overcuts are probably going to end up lining up just fine. But we'll still take it all the way doing the girdle matchup, so we know exactly how much we got to do. We'll estimate. All right, got those facets corrected, and onto the I guess what's technically the white of the eye. These are probably the trickiest facets in the entire thing, and they're also the ones you'll see the most. And these are what determines how round the pupil and the iris part are going to be. These are very important to be as accurate as possible. So the way I do these is I'll start with these outside edge because this is what determines the size. They'll meet at the very tip here. These are all going to be floating in the middle. So we'll start with these 4, and then we'll use those as our reference point for the rest of them. So we'll start with those. Get this raised up. It's also a very steep angle, so there's a problem with kind of tilt and drifting. Kinds of problems. So ease it in here. Also, that's quite a ways to go. So I'm sweeping a little more, pushing up, giving it a little bit of pressure for now. But you don't want to push super hard and put a big tilt on it or something. I'll also switch between the two that I'm working on because it'll help the one you're working on get too big and it's slowing down. Now I'm just making sure that all the scratches are going the same direction. I think I had a little twist on the very tip of 2 of them. So the meats look a little off. I just want to bring these in and make sure they're actually hitting a true center. So right now the tip is meeting, but the center line is off. But I think the tip is cut crooked. So there we go. It's moving up at the center point, but the tip is staying put. So I'm just gonna go until that center point is lined up because that seems to be more accurate. That's also what we're going for, is a center point here. Yep, there we go. That is almost perfect. That tip never moved. Move the top of the facet to the center point a lot, but that meat down at the very bottom didn't move at all. So now is a nice center point, and these are perfect on the ends. As we work on these, I actually am going to cut these to a center point. I am not going to worry about lining them up at this time with the step that we did before, because if we have a perfect center point, our pupil is going to be perfectly round. These do end up being pretty long facets, so the chances of the lap making something tilt or cut crooked is really high. So we're just gonna make sure that that center point is perfect, as perfect as possible. But this is where the accumulated errors all the way from the culet to here and potentially move stuff. If you're off a little bit on the culet, and then you're off a little bit on the variant, and then a little bit on the girdle, each step, by the time you get here, those meats you won't have a perfect center anymore. It's just, no matter how careful you are, chances are one of them's going to be off. But the goal is to make them, any misses so small that you can't see it with the naked eye, and you might have to search a bit with a loupe. And this very first one I'm doing here lines up perfectly. So we know we did really good. We got center point between 2, 4, 6 facets and it lined up. So that is hard to do. I start with the largest ones. So I basically do the north, south, east, west sets. You end up with the 8 facets, and then you can kind of tell where your crosshairs are. Once they start getting super small, it's hard to tell. And you can start hand rubbing the smaller ones in. You couldn't hand rub these in all the way because it would just take far too long. Probably destroy your lap in the process. So just adjust the angle and everything. Can start working on the iris part, and this part's kind of important. The measurements need to be very accurate to your drawing because the size of it will determine how it looks by the end, and how big the actual like floating part of the iris looks, and if there's going to be like a little pinprick of a pupil. It's very, very specific. So the first thing I do is I'll cut on opposite sides to my center point and make that the size of the iris I'm looking for based on my drawing. And if you're off by even a 1/4 millimeter, it will look a little different, which isn't the worst thing. It doesn't ruin it, but if there's a specific like render that you're trying to get and you want it to be accurate, then it's important that it be very close to that. So we'll get going here in the first one. It's also a very shallow angle, so there's a lot of quill movement and stone movement, and these are also very, very small facets, so you can get close, and then we'll let pre-polish kind of assume that the pre-polish is going to move them a little ways. So I'll pull this one a little bit short, so I'm letting the machine kind of find my depth right now. So even rough though, you can see it's a pretty round iris there. And that should be it for the 600, so I'll let that spin dry and we'll clean up the machine, get the pre-polish lap on, and move on from there. So here's the pre-polish lap. I just get my diamond stick out. I'm not gonna charge or anything. It does look like it has a good charge on it. Angle is set. I'm just gonna wipe off dust. And again on Moissanite, especially blue, just trying to get rid of all the 600 scratches, not necessarily a perfect finish because it just won't pre-polish perfect on every facet. Alright, starting on the next whole section of the stone, which will be the whites of the eye, basically. I'm going to start with those ends again. So those usually take the most pre-polish. Alright, so we got the ends done. Now we'll just work on the rest of it here. And we can no longer verify the accuracy of these facets with the center point, so we have to kind of keep an eye on, check them before you go. You know, meat is off a little bit. These are looking pretty good though. So on this side, I'll be able to just follow my meats. But if there's a meat that's a little off or something like that, the center point is more important at this point with the pre-polish. Those 3 quick facets, but that's pretty warm. So I'm not going to make sure I don't push too hard on the stone just in case that wax is soft, and give this a second to cool down. It is pre-polishing extremely fast. So now is the tricky part is going to be the pupil. We're going to be moving meats a lot and double checking everything and making adjustments as we go, and possibly even having to go back to this tier. So I'm going to set that one up and then we'll get going on that. Now we're on to the pupil, and it was cutting pretty good, so we're going to, or pre-polishing pretty good, so we're going to leave it at that for now. Get some more paper towel. Go through a lot on pre-polish with the cooling down. Start with the 4 sides and the 2 facets on those sides. Now I want to move the facets, but I don't want to go too far, because then we got to move every single one that far. And even though they're small, it can take a while. Temperature should be not a huge issue with such small facets. Barely even making contact with the lap. It's cutting, it's doing pretty good. I'm gonna drop it a little bit. The slightest movement moves this a lot, so very small adjustments. So make sure any overcuts from the 600 aren't going to be a problem. So I want these to be very smooth. This design is painstaking because you can ruin it at pretty much any step. You can get all the way to the end and then mess up on the pupil, and then the whole thing won't look right. We're lining up in both the center, more or less the center point, and the facets on the second tier, which of course those can be off a little bit, so if you have to decide between the two, choose the center point. Make as many adjustments as needed when you're doing just the 8 to find the center. Try to be as precise as possible. It makes adjustments a little easier as you go. I'm just kind of going back and forth as one overcuts a little. I can kind of see which one isn't quite meeting, and just work back and forth until you get a perfect center between all 8 facets. You might notice one side's not deep enough altogether, or one was overcut, but you should be able to get a pretty accurate center point. So I'm just kind of going back and forth. As one overcuts a little, I can kind of see which one isn't quite meeting, and just work back and forth until you get a perfect center between all 8 facets. I want that center point to be super tight, so if I see any that are running a little short, I want to make sure I get them where they need to go. We'll clean it up again before polish, but there we go. So clean up everything and get going on polish. Alright, we got the polishing lap on, and I'm going to charge it right away. Alright, get it lined up. Drop it in slow. See if we need to make any adjustments right away. Looking pretty good. Just a slight adjustment. I'm running the lap a little bit slower. Don't have to worry about meats moving at all. Make sure I'm looking at. Oh, see, I thought that was. I think it's just dust. Yeah, oh, it's just dust. So that looks good. I had a pretty good pre-polish, so I'm not going to worry too much about spinning really fast and moving faster. It should. Don't think there's many problem facets, maybe 1 or 2. I'm not sure if you can hear the difference, but I can feel the difference of a fresh char. It just kind of glides a lot smoother. If you're wondering how I know when it's ice, just if it looks slow or something, feel it in the stone. It doesn't catch, it just kind of glides real nice and smooth. I have a little contamination somewhere. It's putting a little, luckily very shallow scratch. So it's polishing out just fine, but it's annoying. With Moissanite, that'll work out pretty quick. It's probably just there's really no other stone that can scratch. It's probably just a little ball of diamond. And just from using it, it'll wear down. That looks good. I like to do them in sets of 3. I feel like it's easy to keep track, and you know if there's a scratch or one of them didn't quite work out, you know easily which one it was. A little frosting on the previous one. This one polished well, except to hit that little scratch again. See if that's enough to get rid of it. Yeah, so that got rid of the scratch, but that previous one has a little frosting. Oh, a little scratch popped out now. Yikes! Holy smokes! Something is stuck in this lap, I think. Because you're polishing, so it's not chips of moissanite. I'm gonna clean all the oil off of this. That's a lot of scratches. I'm gonna run my nail over it to see if I can feel anything. Yeah, that's just scratching. Let's get some oil on it. Also kind of clean, make sure there's nothing on there. A little oil. Diamond. A little thicker coat of diamond. My contamination is still in there, but the rest of the lap is polishing pretty well. So I just need to avoid that one spot. I'll probably run a sharper piece of Moissanite over this at some point. See if I can knock that out. Now it's polishing great.